As Bob Woodward has revealed that Donald Trump sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin at the height of the pandemic when Americans couldn't get them.
Imagine you're waiting in line for a COVID test, feeling like it's taking forever. Now, picture former President Trump quietly sending a package to Putin at FedEx. What's in that package? The very COVID test you're anxiously waiting for. This isn't some wild fiction. It's a true story, and it's more surprising than any crazy headline from Florida. While Americans were stuck waiting, Trump actually sent rare COVID test machines to Putin. And believe me, the details of this situation are even more shocking than you can imagine. During his time in office, Trump's slogan, "America First," was everywhere.
This campaign, when he was president, he put Americans first.
I put America first. I always did, and I always will. As your president, I put America first.
He would definitely mumble it in his sleep, tweet it in all caps, and shout it from the rooftops. "My priority is the United States of America." He'd proudly declare, "I always did, and I always will," puffing out his chest like a peacock trying to impress. But the most concerning part is that while he was assuring Americans they were his top priority, he was secretly doing favors for his buddy Putin. The news that Trump was sending rare COVID test machines to Vladimir Putin shocked everyone. It's true. While Americans were facing long lines and test anxiety, Trump was playing Santa Claus for the Kremlin. It's like he added a little asterisk to his America First motto. Asterisk, except when Putin calls asterisk. This whole situation is as ridiculous as someone claiming they're on a diet while sneaking pizzas to a friend and texting, "I swear, honey, I'm sticking to salad."
Talks about Americans like he's collecting Pokemon. We had men, women, people with diplomas, people without diplomas, Bulbasaur, Charizard.
He then adds extra pepperoni to the mix, mixing his America First talk by day with his nighttime antics with Putin. That's our Trump. We can't ignore the backdrop of this secret partnership. Yes, Americans were in dire need of COVID tests. Early risers stood in long lines, hoping to get their saliva tested before the kits ran out. In some areas, finding a COVID test was tougher than finding a snowball in the summer. Meanwhile, Putin's love for riding shirtless seemed to earn him special treatment. You might be wondering how Trump managed to secretly get those COVID test samples to the lab. Was a diplomatic pouch his hiding spot?
So Trump was clear, as president, he put Americans first, like during the early days of the pandemic, when it was basically impossible for Americans to get their hands on highly sought-after COVID tests.
Trump made it clear as president that he put Americans first, especially during the early days of the pandemic when it was nearly impossible for people to get their hands on the highly sought-after COVID tests. Maybe he thought he could just stash them away with some MAGA hats, and no one would notice the package labeled "Not COVID tests." While many questions linger about this secret operation, one thing is clear. Trump managed to deliver this unique testing equipment while everyone was focused on Putin. Just when you thought things couldn't get weirder, Putin enters the scene. He was the anxious one, while Trump seemed like the life of the party when it came to these unusual COVID exams. Why was the Russian leader so worried about this gift from a friend? It seems that Trump was more concerned about how Americans would react than about Putin's feelings. When Putin learned about the secret COVID test shipment from Trump, his reaction was priceless. He asked, "Please don't tell anyone you sent these to me." Can you imagine the shirtless horseback rider worrying about how Americans would respond? It's like discovering that the school bully has kitten insecurities. But for Trump, he didn't seem to care at all. In response to Putin's worries, he shrugged it off, saying, "I'm indifferent." It was as if he was only thinking about lunch instead of the possibility of starting a global crisis. In stark contrast to Putin's anxiety, Trump appeared carefree. Picture this. Putin, wearing his KGB alumni shirt and sweating, whispers into the phone, "Donald, my friend, are you sure this is a good idea? What if the Americans find out?" Trump responds, "Relax, Vlad." Meanwhile, he probably lounged in his golden toilet, thinking that Americans were too busy hunting for toilet paper to notice a couple of COVID tests. And by the way, was he worried about getting impeached again? During this time, the US-Russia relationship was as cold as a Siberian winter. Trump's behavior seemed even more reckless. It was as if his degree from Trump University gave him the green light to send Putin special COVID tests. It makes you wonder what other plans these two had behind closed doors. Perhaps Trump was negotiating to build Trump Tower in Moscow, or maybe Putin was getting an endless supply of spray tan. The most ridiculous part, It seemed like Putin was more interested in American public opinion than Trump was. It's as if Trump was playing checkers while Putin was strategizing in four-dimensional chess. Even presidents have to deal with the consequences of their actions, and Putin's worries showed he understood this better than Trump did. Clearly, Putin was aware of the political fallout, while Trump appeared clueless. His approach to COVID testing was as sensible as trying to save the Titanic with a sieve. What did Trump tell Americans about testing while Putin was getting special treatment? Here, we have some tests, he might as well have said. In reality, Trump downplayed the importance of testing as if he were solving a math problem by throwing away the calculator. Tests are overrated, he proclaimed, asking, "What happens after someone takes a test?" Well, Donnie, when people find out they're sick, they take steps to avoid spreading the virus. But who needs logic when you can deny reality, right? Meanwhile, Americans were stuck facing a shortage of tests that would drive anyone crazy. In Arizona, for example, the average wait time for a swab was 12 hours, and then the results took another week to arrive. You'd have plenty of time to rethink your life choices while watching all the extended versions of Asterisk, The Lord of the Rings Asterisk. Trump's reasoning was as useless as a chocolate teapot. Claiming you don't need a parachute is just as ridiculous as saying you can jump less when you're about to crash. Unfortunately, our orange turd-in-chief completely missed the error in his logic, too busy patting himself on the back for his brilliant solution to the testing crisis. The consequences of insufficient testing were dire. It became as challenging as herding cats in the dark while wearing oven mitts when there weren't enough tests to track and contain the virus's spread. Making decisions about isolation or contact tracing without accurate data was a recipe for disaster. Attempting to extinguish a house fire with a water cannon is akin to trying to douse a raging forest fire with the same tool. It simply doesn't work. Thus, Trump's testing approach and his exaggerated claims require an equally ludicrous explanation. Brace yourselves. He had the audacity to suggest that the country's reputation took a hit when more tests were conducted because more cases would be reported. I mean, seriously, if we just stop weighing ourselves, then obesity will vanish. What perfect reasoning. Our esteemed president is just flawless. His COVID plan kept spiraling into the absurd, and just when you thought it couldn't get worse, think about this. His solution to the testing shortage was to cozy up to Putin by gifting him a stash of rare COVID tests. It felt like he was playing a twisted game of pandemic response bingo. Let's recap this ridiculous scenario. Our orange turd was acting as Putin's secret Santa, while Americans were waiting in lines longer than CVS receipts for tests they desperately needed. If you look closely, you'll notice Trump's addition a little asterisk at the bottom of his America First motto. After I cook up my dictator pals. Why would Donnie Diapers prioritize Putin over his own people? Perhaps he equated COVID tests to friendship bracelets, believing that the more tokens he gave, the stronger their bond would become. Or maybe he thought Putin would return the favor with an endless supply of hair dye. Who knows how Trump's mind works? The Trump-Putin friendship is a farce ripe for ridicule. Maybe they even have a secret handshake involving brushing each other's hair or pull practical jokes on other world leaders. Hey, is the fridge on? If you want to stop it before it crosses the border, you better catch it. Putting aside the comedic timing, Trump has a documented history of prioritizing personal relationships over national interests. Remember when he trusted Putin more than American intelligence agencies? He casually entertained Russian officials in the Oval Office and discussed sensitive information as if he were just chatting about the weather. To him, being president seemed less about leading the nation and more about expanding his social circle. Now, with this little COVID testing scheme, you might be wondering about the potential repercussions. Buckle up for the camel's back-breaking moment, Buttercup, because this revelation could be the tipping point. Playing favorites with foreign leaders is one thing, but playing with people's lives during a pandemic is an entirely different ballgame.